I bought the cabin for peace. I didn't want noise parties or anyone asking me to explain why I preferred silence over company. I wanted one quiet Christmas somewhere no one could find me or need me. So when I closed on the little black-walled A-frame tucked into the pine ridge above Ridgepoint, it felt like an exhale I'd been holding for 32 years. The first morning there, I made coffee and stepped onto the deck. The sky looked like brushed steel, the valley still half asleep under snow. I took a picture. The shot was simple sunlight spilling over the railing, a mug in my hand, mountains breathing in the distance. It wasn't meant for anyone but me. Still habit 1. I posted it on my private Instagram with the caption, "My kind of quiet." 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed like a wasp nest. The family group chat, usually silent for months, was exploding. "Beautiful view," my aunt wrote. "Where is this?" my cousin added. Then came the message that turned my coffee sour. "Perfect, Ryan and Emily can move in by Friday." That was my mother. Not a question, not a maybe, a statement. A command dressed up as enthusiasm. I just stared at the screen. For years they'd forgotten me, forgotten to invite me to call to ask if I was spending the holidays alone. Every December came with the same polite excuse. "We thought you were busy with friends." Yet the moment I built something of my own, they appeared like clockwork, ready to take it over. It wasn't about needing a place. Ryan, my older brother, already had a house near the city and a wife expecting their first child. This was about control. In our family, independence wasn't celebrated. It was treated like defiance. I could already picture it. My parents showing up with boxes, Ryan barking orders, Emily smiling tightly while unpacking their baby gear. I'd seen that movie before, me standing quietly on the sidelines while they decided what to do with my life. For a second, I almost laughed. Of course it would happen this way. Of course the one place I'd bought to disappear would become their next project. But something in me had changed. Maybe it was the mountain air, maybe just exhaustion, but I didn't text back right away. I looked out over the valley instead, the snow glowing faintly under the weak sun, and realized this was the first time I'd owned something they couldn't give or take. No shared mortgage, no family help, no approval needed. Just me, a house, and a view they hadn't earned. That morning, I made a quiet promise to myself. No one was moving in, not even for a weekend. I didn't buy a mountain to host another family Christmas. I bought it to finally have one of my own. I closed my phone, locked the screen, and whispered the only boundary I'd ever truly meant. Not this time. I grew up in a town called Brookhaven, Connecticut. It was the kind of place where people left wreaths on every door in December, and the snow on the sidewalk stayed clean because everyone shoveled at the same time. From the outside, my family looked picture-perfect two-story colonial house, matching sweaters, smiles polished for Christmas cards. But inside, there was a quiet rule I learned early: Ryan mattered most. My brother was the family's pride. His trophies filled a whole wall in the hallway. School awards, football medals, photos from debate tournaments, all framed, all gleaming. Every family dinner turned into a recap of Ryan's achievements. If he made varsity, we celebrated with cake. If I got an A, someone would glance up and say, "Good job, honey," before turning back to him. I stopped trying to compete long before high school ended. By the time I turned 19, I had already accepted my role as the background character in my own home. That Christmas, my parents said they were heading to Palm Beach for a quiet getaway. They told me to enjoy the break and maybe catch up on work. A few days later, I saw a photo online, our house lit up, everyone dressed in red, standing around a 10-foot Christmas tree. The caption said, "Best family Christmas ever." My name wasn't tagged. I wasn't even mentioned. It hit me harder than I expected. Not because they left me out, I'd been left out before, but because it was the first time they didn't even think they needed to hide it. I remember staring at that picture and realizing I could vanish and it wouldn't change their plans. I wasn't angry then, just hollow. After that, I built routines to fill the silence. I worked extra shifts, stayed late at the office, volunteered for projects no one else wanted. I learned how to cook for one, how to watch movies without checking my phone, how to talk myself out of crying when holiday music played in stores. Every success became a wall brick. The better I performed, the less I needed them. People at work called me reliable. I called it survival. Looking back now, I see how I mistook independence for safety. I thought if I could become perfect enough, no one could hurt me again. But perfection doesn't protect you, it just hides the bruises better. What I really wanted wasn't applause or recognition. I just wanted to be seen to matter in the room I grew up in. And when that didn't happen, I learned to build rooms of my own, one hard-earned wall at a time. The year everything changed started with a bonus check. It wasn't a miracle, just the reward for years of overwork. Late nights at Meridian and Cone, forgotten lunches, saying yes when everyone else said no. When the email came through, end-of-year compensation adjustment, $85,000, I read it 3 times before it sank in. It felt less like money and more like permission. Permission to stop waiting for life to get better and start building something that was mine. For weeks, I browsed listings every night after work, scrolling through endless photos of houses that looked too polished, too close to neighbors, too loud. Then one evening I found it a narrow black A-frame tucked deep into the Ridgepoint Mountains. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a small deck that looked over a frozen valley, pine trees like guardians on every side. It wasn't big, but it felt alive, real, untouched by other people's voices. The listing said sold as is, but I didn't care. I wanted something raw, something I could claim with both hands. Buying it wasn't easy. My parents had taught me that real estate is family business, which really meant they expected to be involved in anything I owned. So instead of telling them, I created Everpine LLC, a small, quiet company, with my name nowhere on the public record. It was my invisible shield. The deed went under the LLC. The taxes were filed through a business account, and every detail was sealed behind layers of paperwork. For once, my freedom had a legal form. After signing the final document, I wrote a short creed on a sticky note and placed it on my desk. Keys mine. Address private. Access invite only. Those 3 sentences became my compass. The keys symbolized ownership, the address represented identity, and the access, well, that was the boundary I'd never been allowed to have. When I finally stood inside the cabin, it smelled like cedar and dust. Light poured through the glass walls, turning the snow outside into soft gold. The space was empty except for a single wooden chair left by the previous owner. I sat down wrapped in silence so thick I could hear my own heartbeat and realized something simple but life-changing: peace doesn't come when people stop hurting you. It comes when you stop giving them the power to. That cabin wasn't just a home. It was proof that I could exist without permission. It stood there surrounded by frozen mountains, like a declaration I'd spent years too afraid to say out loud. I belong to myself now. Owning the cabin was one thing, making it mine was another. The place had good bones, but felt neglected, like it had been holding its breath for too long. So I spent the first few weeks rolling up my sleeves and turning it into something that finally reflected who I was: quiet, self-sufficient, and in control. I painted the kitchen walls a deep green that reminded me of the pine trees outside. I swapped the harsh ceiling lights for warm pendant bulbs that cast a golden hue in the evenings. I fixed what I could and learned what I didn't know from YouTube tutorials. The work wasn't glamorous, but it was grounding. For the first time, my hands weren't typing or signing documents, they were building something that would last. The next step was security. I installed smart locks on every door, reinforced the strike plates, and added motion cameras along the porch and driveway. It wasn't paranoia. It was peace of mind. I'd spent too many years living at the mercy of other people's boundaries. This time, I wanted my own. Each upgrade was like drawing a line no one could cross without permission. The hum of the security system became background music, a constant reminder that I was finally safe. Then came my favorite part: writing the rules. Not family rules, not emotional ones, but real, measurable policies. I drafted what I jokingly called my guest policy, modeled after a corporate handbook. Clear terms, no exceptions. No entry without invitation. No overnight stays unless approved. No spare keys for anyone. It might sound cold, but it wasn't about keeping people out. It was about keeping my peace intact. There's a difference between isolation and protection, and I was learning that for the first time. One night, after a long day of sanding cabinets, I closed the front door and turned the deadbolt. The metallic click echoed through the empty space. It was a small sound, almost unnoticeable, but it hit me harder than I expected. That single click meant something I'd been chasing for years. It was the sound of ownership, of safety, of finally belonging somewhere without apology. In that quiet cabin surrounded by the hum of electronics and the smell of fresh paint, I realized boundaries aren't walls meant to shut the world out. They're doors with locks that remind you who holds the key. And that night, the key was in my hand. After weeks of paint fumes and sawdust, I decided it was time to fill the cabin with something other than silence. I called my closest friends Ava, Luis, and Priya and invited them up for a weekend getaway. They didn't hesitate. By Friday night, their car was winding through the snowy road, headlights bouncing off the trees. When they arrived, we hugged like kids after a long summer apart. The house, once echoing with emptiness, suddenly felt alive. That weekend became everything I didn't know I'd been missing. We cooked dinner together, the kind of messy, loud cooking that leaves flour on your jeans and laughter in the air. Ava handled the music, Luis grilled outside in the cold, and Priya made cocktails that tasted like melted snow and citrus. We ate by the fire, talked about everything and nothing, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to earn my place at the table. I belonged simply because I was there. Later that night, I FaceTimed my grandmother, Ruth. She'd always been the quiet observer of our family, the one who saw things others ignored. When she saw me sitting by the fire, her smile filled the screen. "You look happy," she said softly. I turned the camera to show her the cabin, the friends, the warmth. "I finally built my own mountain," I told her. She nodded like she'd been waiting to hear those words. "You've climbed it too," she said. That conversation stayed with me long after the call ended. I realized that maybe peace doesn't have to mean solitude. Sometimes it's the sound of your best friend's laugh or the hum of a song you all know by heart. It's the feeling of safety that doesn't depend on anyone's approval. On Sunday morning, as we stood on the deck with steaming mugs of coffee, I snapped a photo of the view, the soft snow, the line of trees, a few footprints where we'd danced the night before. I posted it without thinking, the same way I had with the first one. But by the time my friends left and the house went quiet again, my phone started buzzing. The same group chat, the same pattern. My family had seen it. The warmth from the weekend hadn't even faded when the chill came back. Not from the mountain, but from what I knew was coming next. The warmth from that weekend hadn't even cooled before everything started to unravel. It began with a single notification. My photo, the one I'd posted of the deck, with snow melting off the railing, had been screenshotted and shared in the family group chat. At first I didn't think much of it. Maybe they just wanted to comment on the view. But when I opened the thread, my stomach dropped. My mother had written, "Looks perfect. Ryan and Emily will start moving their things up on Friday." No question mark, no ask, just a declaration. Then came my father's message. "Major life decisions like this should be discussed with the family. Clara." There it was again, the assumption that my choices were community property, that I was still a child playing at adulthood. They had forgotten that I'd paid for every brick, every screw, every breath of mountain air with my own effort. To them, my success wasn't independence. It was an extension of their control. I could almost see it playing out. My brother Ryan pulling up the driveway, Emily smiling politely while unpacking boxes, my parents walking through each room, making suggestions, rearranging my life. It was like a script I'd read 1,000 times. Only this time, I wasn't interested in acting my part. I typed 3 words and sent them before I could second-guess myself. "No. I've made other plans." Minutes later, my phone rang. My father's voice was calm, but it carried that tone I'd grown up dreading, the one that pretended to be reasonable, but was really a command. "Clara," he said, "don't be difficult. Be useful." That phrase had followed me my whole life. Be useful meant, be quiet. Be agreeable. Be what we need you to be. I could hear the familiar echo of it every time I'd stayed silent to keep the peace, every time I'd stepped aside so someone else could shine. But this time the words didn't land. They bounced off. I took a deep breath and replied steady and clear. No one is moving in. That's final. Then I hung up. For a long moment I stood there, the phone still in my hand, heart pounding. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft and relentless, covering the footprints from the weekend before. The cabin felt smaller but stronger, like it understood what I had just done. That night, I locked the doors, turned off the lights, and sat by the window watching the snowfall. I knew this wasn't the end of it. People like my parents didn't take no as an answer. But for the first time, I wasn't scared of what would happen next. I was ready. After that phone call, I knew this wasn't something I could handle with polite conversations or guilt-driven apologies. My parents had crossed too many lines before, and every time I'd tried to reason with them, I ended up surrendering pieces of myself just to keep the peace. But peace bought with silence never lasts. So the next morning, I drove down to the small town of High Timber to meet with an attorney named Dana Winters. Dana's office sat above a coffee shop that smelled like cinnamon and fresh bread. She was calm, direct, and not easily rattled exactly what I needed. After I explained everything, she nodded like she'd heard this story before. Maybe not the cabin or the mountain, but the part about families who believe love is a form of ownership. She pulled out a legal pad and said, "We'll make it simple. Facts, not feelings. That's how we built my protection plan." She drafted a no trespass letter addressed to the county sheriff, naming my parents and my brother Ryan explicitly. It was a legal notice stating that any attempt to enter my property without consent would be treated as trespassing. She helped me register the cabin's address with the sheriff's department and even set up a direct contact protocol in case they tried something again. Her last piece of advice was short and clear: document everything. When I got home, I turned my quiet sanctuary into a digital fortress. I installed motion cameras at every entrance, each one backed up to the cloud. I saved access logs from the smart locks and printed copies of the no trespass letter to keep near the door. It felt strange at first treating my own family like potential intruders, but the truth was, they'd already acted like it. Then came December 23rd. It was close to midnight when my phone pinged a motion alert from the driveway camera. Through the live feed, I saw headlights cutting through the snow, followed by a van I didn't recognize. My stomach dropped when I saw the logo, a locksmith company. Moments later, I heard voices outside muffled by the wind and the metallic sound of tools at the door. I didn't panic. I didn't even move closer. Instead, I pressed the intercom button and spoke into the outdoor speaker. "This is private property. Please leave." There was a pause. My father's voice carried through the cold air, half scolding, half pleading. "Clara, open the door. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." But I didn't answer. Instead, I called the sheriff's line, gave them my case file number, and waited. 10 minutes later, flashing lights illuminated the snow-covered yard. The deputies stepped out, hands resting on their belts, calm but firm. I watched from inside as they spoke to my parents, checked the documents, and escorted everyone, locksmith included, back to their cars. The whole thing lasted less than 15 minutes. When the last tail light disappeared down the mountain road, I locked the door again. The deadbolt clicked, echoing through the cabin. I didn't cheer, I didn't cry. I just sat down on the couch and let the silence settle. For the first time in my life, I hadn't begged to be respected. I hadn't argued or defended myself into exhaustion. That night, I didn't win by shouting louder. I won by standing still, trusting the law, and finally believing that no was a complete sentence. After the locksmith incident, things went quiet for a while. Too quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't mean peace, but planning. I knew my family, they didn't retreat, they regrouped. And sure enough, the next wave didn't come with noise or confrontation. It came with paperwork. It started when a coworker tagged me in a Facebook post I hadn't seen yet. My mother had uploaded a photo of my cabin with the caption, "So proud of Ryan and Emily's new family home in the mountains. Couldn't be happier for them." Dozens of comments flooded in, all congratulating my brother and his wife on their big purchase. At first I laughed. It felt absurd, like something out of a bad movie. But within days, I realized this wasn't just an online stunt. I started getting strange letters forwarded from my old address. Property management offers utility updates, even a mortgage refinance flyer addressed to Ryan and Emily Hayes. Someone had started submitting my cabin's address as their own. That was when I called Dana. She didn't sound surprised. "This isn't a family argument anymore," she said. "It's fraud. We handle it as fraud." Together we started untangling the mess. The first discovery came through the county's public records portal, a document labeled Family Tenancy Agreement. My name was on it, well, sort of. Clara M. Hayes, written in handwriting that looked close enough to mine to fool someone glancing quickly. The form claimed that I had agreed to let my brother and his wife reside in the cabin indefinitely rent-free as family tenants. It got worse. Ryan had apparently tried to register his truck under my cabin's address. Emily called the electric company to update the billing contact, claiming I was away for work. Thankfully, the company refused without proof of ownership, but still it was clear they weren't guessing. They had a plan. Dana didn't flinch. She sat across from me at her desk, tapping her pen against a thick legal pad, and began outlining our next move. Within 48 hours, she drafted a cease and desist letter that ran 20 pages long, citing state property laws, fraud statutes, and impersonation clauses. Copies were sent to the county recorder's office, the sheriff's department, every utility company within a 50-mile radius, and even the postmaster. Each page carried the same calm authority that my family had always tried to strip from me, the language of boundaries written in black and white. For me, it was both surreal and heartbreaking. These were my parents, and my brother, people who once taught me how to ride a bike, who bought my first winter coat. Now they were trying to erase my name from the life I had built, as if it belonged to them by default. That's when I realized something that took me years to see. People who rely on control don't understand freedom. To them, independence feels like rebellion, and boundaries sound like betrayal. So I followed Dana's advice. No responses, no explanations, no emotional reactions. Every text, every email went unanswered. Instead, I kept my proof organized, my paperwork airtight, my silence intentional. They wanted a fight. I gave them facts. And this time, I wasn't playing on their battlefield. By late December, I thought the storm had finally passed. My family had gone quiet again. And for a few days, the mountain felt like it used to, peaceful, still untouched. I let myself believe that maybe they'd realize this wasn't worth it. Maybe the cease and desist had scared them enough to stop. But deep down, I knew better. People like that don't give up, they just change tactics. It happened at 2:11 in the morning. The motion alert from my driveway camera buzzed on my phone, pulling me out of a half-sleep. I expected a deer or maybe the wind setting off the sensor. But when I opened the live feed, my heart dropped. The figure on the screen wasn't an animal, it was my father. He was wearing his old winter coat, the same one I remembered from childhood, standing in front of my mailbox with a flashlight. I watched him pull a thick envelope from his jacket and shove it into the box, looking around like someone checking for witnesses. Then he drove off into the dark. I didn't move for a full minute. I just sat there, the glow of the phone lighting up the room, watching the recording replay over and over. There was no mistaking him. It wasn't anger I felt at first, it was disbelief, the kind that makes your stomach turn cold. Even after everything, they were still trying to rewrite my life on paper. The next morning, I went outside and retrieved the envelope. It was heavy, official-looking, stamped with some random notary seal. Inside was a document titled Household Member Affidavit. According to it, Ryan and Emily Hayes were listed as the primary residents of my property with family agreement and full consent of the owner. There it was again, my name signed at the bottom, forged like the last time. This time, though, they'd made a mistake. The camera had caught everything. I took photos of the envelope, the document, the timestamp on the video feed, and forwarded all of it to Dana. It was barely 7 a.m. when she called. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the sharp edge of satisfaction underneath. "This is it," she said. "They just gave us what we needed. I'm filing the emergency motion now." I didn't fully understand the legal side of it, but I knew what it meant: proof. Real, undeniable evidence that they'd crossed a criminal line. They weren't just overstepping anymore. They were falsifying ownership, and they'd handed us the evidence with their own hands. For the first time in weeks, I felt something stronger than fear. Relief. Not because I wanted to hurt them, but because I finally had something solid, something the law could see and act on. My whole life, my family had operated in the shadows, manipulating through guilt, silence, and pressure. But this time the truth wasn't whispered. It was documented, time-stamped, and recorded. That night I slept with my phone beside me, the quiet hum of the heater filling the cabin. Outside, the snow fell again, soft and endless. I knew a new battle was about to begin, but for once it wouldn't be fought with words or guilt. It would be fought with facts. And the best part, they'd written the confession themselves. By New Year's Eve, the cabin had found its rhythm again. The chaos of lawyers and letters had settled into quiet routine, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. I decided to celebrate not with champagne and glitter, but with warmth. I invited a few close friends and some neighbors from down the road. Nothing fancy, just cocoa music and the kind of laughter that doesn't require pretending. The night was calm, the fire flickered, and the sound of clinking mugs filled the air. On the counter beside the cocoa pot, I placed laminated copies of my no trespass order and the emergency motion, not as a warning, but as a quiet statement of fact. A reminder that peace wasn't a gift I'd been given. It was something I'd built document by document, boundary by boundary. At 8:03 p.m., the quiet broke. Two dark SUVs rolled up the snowy driveway, headlights slicing through the night. I didn't need to look twice. I knew those silhouettes too well. My parents, my brother, and stepping out beside them, a man in a heavy overcoat carrying a leather briefcase, a family mediator as they like to call it. They didn't knock right away. They stood outside for a moment, talking, gesturing toward the house like strategists before a siege. Then came the knock, firm, deliberate, almost theatrical. When I opened the door just a few inches, the man with the briefcase stepped forward and said smoothly, "We're here to resolve things amicably. You've consented by silence." That line hung in the air, absurd and familiar, the same manipulation dressed up in legal language. I almost laughed. Instead, I picked up the folder from the table, flipped it open, and held it where he could see. "This," I said evenly, "is Everpine LLC. And you're trespassing." His face faltered for just a second. Behind him, my mother whispered something to Ryan. My father's jaw tightened. He took a step closer, his voice low and controlled. "Clara, be reasonable." I met his eyes, calm and steady. "I am." Right then, headlights appeared again, this time blue and red, reflecting off the snow. The sheriff's car I had arranged to be on standby pulled in behind their SUVs. Two deputies got out, their boots crunching on the frozen ground. They greeted me politely, then turned to the so-called mediator and my family. I didn't need to hear what was said. The papers I'd handed over spoke louder than any argument ever could. Within minutes, the deputies served them official summonses, proof that this wasn't a conversation anymore. It was law. Emily started to cry quietly, turning away from the porch. My brother helped her back to the car, avoiding my gaze. My mother muttered something I couldn't make out. My father lingered last, his expression shifting from anger to something almost unfamiliar, maybe recognition that this was over. He didn't speak again, he just turned and followed them down the icy drive. When the last car disappeared into the dark, I closed the door. The deadbolt clicked, a soft, final sound that felt like punctuation at the end of a very long sentence. Inside, the music still played. My friends had gone quiet at first, But now the room slowly filled again with laughter and conversation. Someone refilled my cocoa. Someone else turned up the volume on the stereo. I stood there for a moment, just taking it in, the warmth, the safety, the quiet victory of it all. Later, as midnight approached, my phone buzzed with a message from my grandmother Ruth. She had sent only one line: "You earned your peace. Don't ever apologize for it." I looked out through the glass wall at the snowfall, soft and endless, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the forgotten daughter. I felt like the woman who finally learned that peace doesn't arrive when others forgive you. It begins the moment you forgive yourself for choosing freedom.